The Black Death was a plague pandemic that began in approximately 1347 and ended in 1351. The plague disease resurfaced approximately every 20 years or so, and it did not dissipate entirely until the 1800s. However, the years of the Black Death were arguably the most significant outbreak. Three types of plague are theorized to have been present during the Black Death: the bubonic plague, pneumonic plague, and septicemic plague. The bubonic plague, the most common form, affects the lymph nodes. The pneumonic plague affects the lungs and is airborne, thus making it highly transmissible and the most serious form. 90% of individuals who contracted the pneumonic form of the plague died. The septicemic plague affects the blood. The plague could turn the skin and sores black, hence the name of the pandemic, the Black Death. The plague originated in Central Asia, and from there it was spread throughout the world by warriors and traders. It entered Europe, possibly through Sicily, in the year 1347. The plague was transmitted by fleas and rodents and was then passed on to humans. Outbreaks were likely worsened due to the prevalence of rodents and poor sanitary conditions in medieval Europe. The plague spread very rapidly. There was no strategic quarantine, as people would flee in panic and carry the disease with them. The Black Death pandemic most dramatically affected Europe. Europe was already in the midst of a famine, not to mention the violence of the 100 Years' War. Combined with the absence of medicinal skills, Europe suffered greatly. Approximately 25 to 30 million Europeans alone died in these couple of years. That was about 1/3 of the population of Europe.
At the time, the plague was believed to have spread by a bad-smelling gas called miasmas. Uh, Medieval doctors attempted to prevent the spread of the plague by dispelling the so-called miasmas by using other smells. Onions were left in the streets, and the doctors at the time stuffed flowers in their bird-shaped mask. During the Black Death, Christians, Europeans, and prayed and begged for relief. They searched for scapegoats to blame for the plague, and Jewish people were often the target of this. Jewish communities were massacred. Additionally, there were religious groups of people called flagellants who blamed sinners for the plague. They traveled around whipping and begging for forgiveness from God. In the years following the Black Death, many towns were abandoned or completely wiped out. The death toll The high death toll in Europe introduced a labor shortage. As a result, laborers and peasants had to be paid more because their labor was far more valuable. Also, due to this labor shortage, women benefited from more legal rights such as property ownership. Additionally, the Black Death also had psychological effects. Depicted in art was a preoccupation with death. The Dance of Death was a representation of the inevitability of death. It was seen in poetry, visual arts, music, and more. This obsession with death arose from the high death toll that the pandemic caused. There are some parallels between the Black Death and the current COVID-19 pandemic. The both the plague and COVID-19 are vastly different. Also, also our standards of cleanliness and medical knowledge differ greatly from that of medieval Europe. However, there is a notable similarity. During the Black Death, Jewish people were unfairly targeted and blamed for the spread of disease. Today, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Asian people have been targeted and experienced hostility and violence for similar reasons. The same fear and irrational discrimination is present during both pandemics. Overall, the Black Death's significance lies in its massive death toll and its role in social and cultural changes. The pandemic transformed medieval Europe and resulting in the end of serfdom, some increased rights for women, and cultural changes regarding their view of death.